Okay, we are live. Hi, everyone, and welcome to this chat about art, gaming, and collectibles at CADAF Online. Hello.
Hello.
Very
Hello.
nice to see you. Okay, so we are now entering part 2 of this conversation that we had just now with other speakers talking about art, gaming, and collectibles. I would like for you to give a quick introduction about yourself and your project. So I'm just going to start from Steve. Hi, Steve. Nice to have you.
Yes, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Steve Wand here. I'm with GameCredits as well as Digitible. I was in the crypto space back in 2013, found NFTs at ETH Waterloo in 2017 when CryptoKitties won the hackathon. And from there, I've kind of been down the rabbit hole of the NFT metaverse space. And that's where I've landed today with the rest of you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us today. And then we've got Ghislaine. Hi, Ghislaine. Very nice to have you here.
Hi, great to be here. So I'm Ghislaine Boddington. I've been working with the live body and telepresence, motion capture, etc. into virtual worlds since the early 90s. Really been looking at that representation of self into the virtual, so the virtual physical blending. And I work onwards on a project called Internet of Bodies, where my work takes me into looking at the body connectivity through both biometrics, but also through implants and subdermal connectivities.
Fantastic. I'm sure there's a lot to be talking about that subject during our conversation. Thank you for the introduction. And Deen, very nice to have you here.
Hi, thanks for having me. So yeah, I'm Deen Atger. I'm non-binary and my pronouns are they and them. I'm a curator specialized in contemporary and new media art, and I currently am the producer for an art organization called Ugly Duck. And we take over empty buildings and we turn them into art spaces. At the moment, we're based in a fantastic Victorian factory in Bermondsey, and we focus on giving access to space for emerging artists and giving a platform for underrepresented voices and marginalized subject and art forms.
Thank you so much for introducing yourself, and it's great to have you here. And next, we have Alegria. Am I pronouncing this right?
Yes, that's correct. Hi, my name is Alegria. I'm here to talk a little bit about PixelChain and the whale token. There's two different projects that I'm associated with. You might have heard from Leandro a little while ago in the first panel from Crypto Motors and PixelChain as well. So just to mention it again, PixelChain is a pixel editor that's fully on chain that allows users to create a 32 by 32 image, and that image gets translated into bytes, and it all lives on chain. And then the token has a physical, an image representation on like OpenSea or a profile or something like that. And the whale token is basically a social reward token that is given out for doing like simple tasks within the Discord, or just rewarding community for different events.
Thank you. Wonderful to have you here. And next, we've got Drew from the Metafactory. Hi.
Hi, how are you? Yeah, my name is Drew Harding. I'm one of the co-founders of Metafactory. And yeah, Metafactory is a marketplace for decentralized brand economies. It's kind of a cross-pollination of the NFT crypto art scene and the DAO space. And we focus on the creation and production of digi-physical goods. So apparel that exists both in physical meat space and as virtual wearables in various virtual worlds and gaming platforms.
Very exciting. I've been looking at the recent products you launched on Twitter, and I'm very much eager to be talking about that with you in a moment. And then we've got George or Gerg, you tell me, from eGamers joining us today. Hi, nice to meet you.
Hi, Serena. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me today. My name is George Tsagkarakis. I'm a co-founder of eGamers.io. We are a blockchain gaming community and the portal founded in the summer of 2018 with the main goal to connect the gaming community with the blockchain aspect of gaming.
Fantastic, thank you. And I hope we can talk more about the community aspects and how we can bridge those gaps between art and gaming in a moment. Okay, so welcome everyone. The first question I would like to address, and it's a general one, but it would help us sort of diving into the conversation, which is about what is the role of arts in the gaming industry? And, you know, looking at, for example, CADAF, which is the first digital art fair happening solely online, I think it definitely makes sense to address that question and see what are the challenges and the opportunities as well in sort of merging these two worlds. So I would like for you, maybe we can start from Steve again. How do you see the role of arts in the gaming industry?
Well, if you're in the metaverses right now, you would see that art is kind of the driving factor in that space. As Matic and other companies kind of enter that space and make it easier, kind of as launch pads. I think once gaming becomes in there, when gamers are driven to the metaverses, by default, they're going to be surrounded by this beautiful art. Pretty much in every metaverse they're going to be in. Right now, voxels, DCL, and Somnium, that's like a big reason why right now they're being built out, is mostly because of the art space. Whether it's the artists themselves or curators or museums, whatnot being constructed. I think by default, the gamers are going to be, it's going to be in their face. And I don't know many people in this space, either in the gaming or NFT space, who don't kind of have their favorite project, that they have some NFTs or some art. So it's kind of a no-brainer that eventually they're just going to be, it's going to be put in front of their face, and whether they like it or not, it's going to be a part of what they're doing.
Mm-hmm. That's for sure. And I know Ghislaine also has much experience in merging these two worlds together.
Yes, I mean, I think, across a number of years, seeing how arts and gaming has interacted many times in different ways, both obviously in this wonderful aesthetic and creative mode, but also in terms of the methods of narrative and the way that we explore and move through fluid spaces, as the pathways that are taken, the complex pathways, and the multiple choices for narratives, etc. These are, we see in much of the kind of more experimental theatre world, and in the more experimental world of artists working in VR, like Rebecca Allen, for example, who as a young artist, did the motion graphics for Craftworks for We Are Robots, which we all know. But actually now, as a senior artist, is making the most beautiful, wonderful, fluid, open, non-narrative virtual world spaces, which is influencing the next set of gaming, etc.
Absolutely. And I'm sure Deen and Drew can also address how, for example, the physicality of a space, or, for example, wearables, can be integrated in a more gaming environment. What's your experience? I know, Deen, you are also curating and putting together a programming for Alegria. And Drew, you're working with wearables that are very much influenced by artistic craft, creating within a gaming environment. So how did that play out for you? How do you see these two worlds sort of coming together?
Go ahead, Deen.
Okay. I think it's really interesting to see that some of the discussion that are happening in the contemporary art world have been sometimes a little bit after resonating into the gaming industry. And it seems they are certainly had widened some perspective. And for example, on the question related to gender, or to the question of representation, and it seems that the gaming industry has finally started to kind of open up to those questions, and we start to really see a shift in the mentalities. And we can see, for example, the French gaming studio Don't Nod, which is releasing the first play, which is releasing this new game called Tell Me Why, in which we can play the first trans man character in a AAA mainstream video game. And I really think this is one aspect of how art can also inspire the gaming industry in terms of more kind of identity politics.
Yeah,
that's for sure. What's your experience, Drew, on that topic?
Myself, sorry.
Yeah, I was talking
Oh yeah.
about the experience in the wearables and creating, those
Yeah.
products that refer to the gaming environment.
Yeah, I mean, in the last, I believe it was in 2017, we saw gaming, and it's continued on this trend, but the economy within the gaming industry has surpassed both music and movies combined. So from an entertainment perspective, it's a massive force to be reckoned with. And within that, some of the largest properties, the most profitable properties being, I'd say, Fortnite or maybe the Riot League of Legends. The primary economy and profit driver of that is actually aesthetic skins. It's wearables, essentially. These don't necessarily affect gameplay in any way. They're purely a form of expression within the game, a way to distinguish yourself against other players, amongst other players. And so looking at that is fascinating, because those are also coming from the standpoint of a centralized platform, a single publisher, where that's occurring, where there's no form or concept of verifiable ownership, of transferability, interoperability, that all the things blockchain provides for. So you can see how this starts to play into when you compound that conversation with this possibility of verifiable ownership and putting the user in control of the assets themselves versus under the control of like a centralized publisher. So yeah, our interest is expanding upon that in that model, both in a gaming industry sense and in a general physical branding and brand emergence sense. So yeah, and specifically for us, it's about kind of growing, empowering, and building the community and the Web3 culture within itself. The art, kind of focusing on the artists and the communities already in the space and building those up as they're already the thought leaders and kind of pushing the envelope forward. So we're looking to leverage this in regards to existing and up and coming blockchain game platforms, and then also in just the virtual world wearable sense. So Decentraland, CryptoVoxel, Somnium, as Steve touched on. So.
Absolutely. And these are really becoming the places where we all sort of navigate in, since the beginning of the lockdown. I feel most of us have been very much present within CryptoVoxel, Decentraland, sort of experiencing these new worlds and Insomnium space as well. Alegria, and then we'll pass on to George as well. I was interested to know from you, since you're very much involved in these spaces, what do you think are the challenges, but also the opportunities in gamifying art?
Well, to use that as an example, we recently did a collaboration with this game called Eternal between PixelChain and them, which was some of the users that are more artistically inclined. They got to create something in our game or in our platform, and then were able to win a contest and then be able to have that item in another platform or game. That was all very easy. Well, very easy from the user standpoint, right? Like, oh, I submitted a thing and the thing happened and I have my item. But it wasn't as simple as one would have liked, and I think those are still the limitations, right? That it's not easy port over, because in the behind the scenes, it took like quite a team to make this happen, or then to submit it for further minting, and now we have these crazy gas prices. So there's plenty of challenges with a little 32 by 32 pixel image. So but these things are getting smoothed out. Just the fact that we're here now, that we can save a 32 by 32 image completely on chain, people are starting to wanna push that envelope and make things better. So we're seeing like platforms spring up towards that. So still some work to do, but exciting stuff ahead, I guess.
And if we're talking about the opportunities that we see by combining these, industry sector, George and Steve, I know that you're very much involved within talking really to users. How would you say these has improved, for example, since the lockdown? And how do you see art sort of becoming more, commodified within those environments?
Okay, first of all, let me begin by saying that art is a very crucial part for games. It's the first thing that players see, and it is as much important as the gameplay, right? So, like Steve said earlier, we see art nowadays in the metaverses, whether it is Decentraland or crypto voxels or Somnium. Art has a big place in these virtual worlds, and it could definitely drive adoption to the blockchain, especially when you consider that the art now has ownership and it's scarce. And so to answer your other question, there are some challenges when it comes to integrating art in games. One of the challenges is the minting process, and when it comes on the blockchain, where some things are not working as expected right now, especially on Ethereum with the high gas prices and all that stuff. But eventually, art will find its way on the gaming industry. And I'm not saying just art from the side that these graphics look amazing. Art, when it comes to any form of it, it will find its way in the gaming industry for sure. And the advantage is that players could interact with it. For example, let's say we have a sculpture from an artist. A 3D artist could take this sculpture, integrate it inside a game, and the player could interact with this, start a quest, complete another quest, and this could definitely drive some players into this game, at least the ones who are interested in the art.
For sure. And Steve, how do you see that going in terms of the opportunities, challenges, and also communicating those to the communities in the best way possible?
Well, I think the Decentraland right now this week for Art Week is doing a fantastic job of that. They're the 10-day. I've been collecting my POAPs. I've been on a mission to get all 10 of those. But as far as right now, like when you go in the metaverses, the most stunning buildings, the most complex and integrated, like interactive buildings that you're engaging with are typically the art galleries and what's being launched this week. As far as async is pushing different, with the different skins, how I can myself or the price of BTC or ETH is able to change the colors of this, or there might be another face come out of the artwork in the background. That's a very cool way of looking at things. And if you look at OpenSea's top 10, the rolling top 10 for say the last 4 or 5 months, pretty much the companies that are constantly on there are the metaverse companies as well as art. So both of these, you can tell that's where the volume is being driven. They're both highly meshed and integrated with each other right now. And again, when Josie, Coldy, and a number of known artists started building in CV, others came into that. The price spiked. There was huge, media coverage around that. And then the same with DCL now launching this. DCL is getting a ton of coverage, and they keep flip-flopping kind of out of number 1 and 2 with Somnium and Sandbox up there. Maker's Place, Known Origin, and Super Rare are holding their own. So you can tell. And again, I think this is very early crypto, and you can see when ETH came out and things started spiking, I'm getting a sense, just because I buy and sell quite a bit of art, I'm getting a sense that the art market right now is definitely booming. Metaverse prices are holding their own and growing per land on average. So it's not going anywhere, it's only growing. And I can see, when you buy something for 1 ETH last month and you sell it for 7 ETH 4 weeks later, and there's definitely demand for that. There's definitely something going on, and the masses are kind of coming here. And I beg to differ when people say that the BTC and the ETH. If you go to a Bitcoin conference and an Ethereum conference, there's tons of collaboration and building going on at the Ethereum conferences, and there's a bunch of parties and events going on at the Bitcoin conferences. So the both of them are great, but I know you can't knock like Ethereum. There's tons and tons of builds and like things being created every day that I would say blows Bitcoin out of the water, to be honest with you, as far as progression, in short term.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. That's a very vision that you're sharing with us. It's very important, and I think it touches on a lot of us, especially now navigating in those world. That's something that I wanted to address to Ghislaine and Deen, sorry, because I feel they had much experience in working in physical spaces and within the body. And I know that VR and AR have been technologies used so much, not just in theater, but also in reproducing a gaming environment within the IRL. So in terms of curating and looking at contemporary art and those technologies, and also Drew, I think you can also touch on that. I am interested to hear from you. How do you see these shifting from a physical space into a digital space? And is that really a need for us to be replicating what we have in the physical world into the digital world? Meaning, do we actually need to, emulate similar experiences, or can we be a bit more daring? So, Ghislaine, I would like to sort of pass on the word to you to start with, because I know you've been one of the pioneers experimenting with technologies in art.
Yes, well, my background, just to be really clear, is performing arts, and I'm coming from the dance sector. And in the early 90s, I got very engrossed in the technology sector too. So they kind of came together and blended in for me. And my slight obsession was full body telepresence. So we started working as a collective, Shinkansen, Sound and Movement Research, in around 1989 on trying to get remote stage connectivity going. We use 2 live physical studios. We have live audiences in both, but we were always streaming from one to the other, but also streaming an output onto the web. So there was always a final ULR output, which was live and also obviously archived. So great fun. Did lots of experiments with that right through the 90s. This is all full body stuff. So, and then actually moved lots of pieces, etc. But I thought I'd tell you quickly about Me and My Shadow, which actually Deen worked on with me too. We both worked together on this piece for the National Theatre in the Olympics year, where we created a large-scale virtual world, a sim, which actually hung between 4 portals, one in London, one in Brussels, one in Istanbul, one in Paris. And participants could enter one at a time into those 4 portals and instantly become an avatar and move through that virtual world and meet the participants from the other 3 cities. It was real time. It was full body. You had a ripple to show your liveness, your heartbeat. We had individual sounds and colors linked to location. And the game was based really on just digital intimacy, trying to find each other and hug within that virtual space. Yeah. So that was around 2012. We used Connect for that. Yeah. Multiple Connects. Of course, Connect is a living room tool, yes, actually in use for gaming, domestic, etc. But now, of course, we are moving into much bigger realms when we start to look at deep neural networks and AI modeling, being trained to take in motion, etc., and potentially being able to carry around with us a whole set of motions that we use in multiple different metaverses.
Thank you. That's so fascinating to actually hear what the story of these technologies as represented for many of us as artists. And Deen, what's your experience in sort of curating exhibitions and working on projects that had VR and AR technologies embedded within it?
Sorry, is it for me, this question?
Yes. Thank you.
Oh, sorry. Can you repeat? I was just it was
Of
buffering.
course, yeah, sure. I was interested, since Ghislaine gave us a good introduction about, kind of the history of how artists have been interacting with VR and AR technologies. And I was sort of touching upon the fact that, do we actually need to replicate the physical environment within the digital one? So we've seen experiments such as Decentraland and CryptoVoxel, for example, sort of being more creative in a way and having a bold vision towards what we could imagine. And also CADAF as a fair is sort of proposing yet a new model of encountering one another into the metaverse. So I was interested to know from you, from a curatorial point of view, how you've been merging technologies and applying those technologies such as VR and AR in a gamified art experience.
Yeah, totally. I think since the 90s, digital interactive art has also risen in popularity and have many times been really successful in its attempt to shift the position of a passive viewer into an active player when experiencing an artwork. And I'm very interested in that. And I think we can see clearly more and more intersection between game, contemporary art, education, and curating. And I think for this, the shift of position from the passive to active becomes a really interesting vector for better identification and for better understanding of different stories and different experience. And for this, again, in terms of identity politics, I would like to kind of talk a bit more about an artwork called We Are Here Because of Those That Are Not, created by Danielle Brathwaite-Shirley, who's a Black trans woman, and this artwork was presented at the Science Gallery, and it's essentially a game where you go through a journey and you have to resurrect trans memories. And the way it's presented is really interesting because this game is accessible online, but in the context of a museum, was presented in a room, and the viewer is sitting in kind of in a gamer seat, and you have the 3 buttons in front of you. And I think it's really interesting to basically this position physically make you recognize and acknowledge your privilege. And it's the first privilege in this specific piece is actually to be alive, because as in opposition of the kind of characters in the story. And with this privilege, you can resurrect Black trans memory and ancestors. And this really makes you grasp quite strongly how in real life you can also use those privileges that you've just used on this online to enable minorities to kind of help them to have a better life or spoke for them. And I think this is just really interesting how you have this kind of dialogue between the physical and the digital, and that actually the digital can really influence the physical rather than only the physical influencing the digital.
For sure, there's a lot of communication in terms of how do we perceive those environments and also the sensorial experience that we can somehow emulate. Alegria, I wanted to sort of address these to you as well, since you've been contributing to building those places. And I wanted to ask you, is rendering the IRL in the URL the new gaming art experience? What are your thoughts on that?
It seems because PixelChain and Crypto Motors are also involved in building a lot in the metaverse. They have pretty big builds in Crypto Voxels, Mozilla Hubs, and now the people, the team at Decentraland built this beautiful gallery for us. In PixelChain, so we're very familiar with with what people are asking for, since they do builds for others, and it always kind of we haven't seen things get too crazy. It's usually like, oh, can you recreate this same building? So people like have an affinity to how the way things are, and aren't too aware yet of what the possibilities are of this brand new world, right? Like, oh, there is no need for stairs, or so people are getting around to it. Oh, you can fly, so you don't need to do silly things like interpret it this way. Or now some people are hanging up art like up really high, so you have to fly up and close to see it. So it's interesting to see how these things come into play in the metaverse. Excited to see the more and more creative ways, and that's only going to be through art. that we're gonna get some new, different type of architecture in there, because architecture is a form of art and it's beautiful. So I'm excited to walk around a building sculpture.
Your
Super.
pixel
Yeah.
chain building is getting a lot of attention. It's kind of retro Atari-esque, not TV, but in DCL, it's really cool. A lot of people are talking very positive about it.
They really blew us away, and there's so many hidden little parts in it. So make sure you check it out.
Totally, yes, absolutely. And, I wanted to sort of pass on to Drew asking, in your project, have you been integrating physical and digital environments? Because I know you sort of stand in between these two, and I was interested to understand better how do you sort of juggle between those?
Yeah, I think like it's interesting because obviously even just thinking about like the virtual worlds, we're coming from these existing mental models of the physical space and how buildings are built today and how doors work and how we travel through these physical spaces. And a lot of the architecture, the design of these worlds are driven by those existing mental models. But the funny thing is we have complete creativity and flexibility to actually like craft these in whichever way we want. But I think that's a strong starting place for most people, again, in not just in this context, but all in terms of the existing mental models they have, and we build from there. In our case, yeah, we're doing this with apparel, fashion as our primary avenue. It's not like the sole thing we're focused on, but yeah, it's the ability to actualize yourself in a digital space, and using physical goods as something I wear in the real world, in meat space. But then I can also put it on my avatar and use that to personalize or customize my character in a game, in a virtual world, whatever it may be. But it's also interesting because we have this opportunity in the digital space to also kind of be more bold and expressive if we want to actually become the person that I see as the real me, right? And so that's like full avatar optionality and whatnot. And I think we'll slowly start to progress to that level. At the same time, I think there will be individuals and people who are interested in maintaining a reference or a thread of connection between their real world personality and their digital personality. As an extension of that, associating or aligning with a particular brand that you also may be an active participant in crafting. That's kind of where we're coming from in our model, as kind of being able to create that sense of belongingness that we all like seek as humans, but in a digital context. Being a part of something that's bigger than ourselves, whether that be exclusive or cool or whatever it is, but being able to impose our values, whatever those may be, as a subculture, as a community, into whatever we're building and creating. So yeah, specifically for us, we have this digital physical connection with apparel, and that's kind of this linking point. But I think that can extend much, much further. And I think in terms of how this idea of participation and active involvement, I think is like a big one versus kind of passive consumer. And this exists at a gaming level, at a commerce level. We're already starting to see really, really cool things. I know Steve touched on async art and how they have this ability to kind of programmatically change artwork with different layers. One of the recent sales, a collab between Skeeny and Rare Designer, has actually been adopted and will be implemented in Neon District, for instance. So the people who own those layers and are able to actively transform that art, that would be sitting live in a game platform, and they'll be able to actively kind of change that while others are going through this gaming experience. So that exists at a kind of at that level, participating in actually recreating or changing the game environment. It exists at a merchant or at a wearable level too, being able to actually have an aesthetic in the real world, but also that I can use in this game platform. It's interoperable between. So I think we're really just starting to scratch the surface of possibility. And I think we're only really limited by our own creativity in these things. But for us, we also see the physical side being a really strong gateway and anchor for new audiences that are just starting to explore these spaces and opportunities. And as a way to even pull them down the rabbit hole of possibility, starts with, that's a really cool shirt, to, oh, you get a digital wearable. Well, what's a digital wearable? Well, it's an NFT. Well, what's an NFT? And it just, well, you can wear it in the virtual. So it just like sends them down the possibility route. And from there, it's, it's just expands. So it's exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes me think of the project that the Fabricant, for example, is doing within those digital clothing, which are unique, that you can have within the physical and the digital space.
Right.
But talking about, the engagement and the wearables and how we somehow perceive them, I think there's a huge gap still within the more traditional contemporary arts market, but also the overall industry and the way art is perceived in a way. So I'm interested to sort of address this to Steve and Ghislaine, because I know you both live within the more art world and the more gaming world. And I would like to know from you, how would you think it would be best to communicate those possibilities and the fact that we can be creative, and that the only limit, as Drew mentioned, is actually our own creativity. So how can we really push the boundaries and connect communities on a large scale, on a global scale, by using technologies that can empower us to really engage with people and make them understand that the digital world, it is very much real. Ghislaine?
Well, from our work, because we are working very much from the physical body into virtual space, so into virtual and physical and virtual space connected, we start with the premise that the body is the interface. So actually, everything we do is started from the body and moves back and forward into virtual and physical. And therefore, that means that we're particularly interested in full body. We do work with some wearables. We're working with motion capture. We look at senses and the enhancement of our senses, the enhancement of our ability to interact. So when we started doing the telepresence experiments in the mid-90s, we did hundreds of them, all over performing arts. But we did both local to local connections, like between youth clubs across towns, and we did a lot of local to global scenarios, international connections too. And there, I think we learned a lot of methods and techniques, as one does when one's creating virtual worlds too, about actually the way that people will behave or navigate or orientate themselves within those environments. There is a need for people to connect locally, local to local, as much as there is local to global. And there's a lot of excitement around that, often weirdly, when communities just down the road from each other suddenly find each other, But there is also, I think, a need for the proof that the liveness, that the real time is happening. And when you're doing performance stuff, you can do that through, Mexican waves, or through questions and answers, or through just, everyone waving at each other like we did at the beginning of this, just to kind of prove the liveness side of it. So I think what's interesting for onwards is actually, how do we aim towards those ongoing connections and make them more meaningful, but and make them fun, and make them definitely continue this ability, the wonderful ability within virtual worlds to actually completely shapeshift into another being, another part of yourself, or a multi-self that you want to explore in different ways. This is all about identity. It's all about how you explore the world, how you actually move yourself out of different realms you're in, whether it's work, social, family, etc., and have those releases into being who you want to be at different points in time and different points in your life, and connect with others.
Thank you. Yes. And Steve, if we're talking about engaging with communities on a global scale, what does that look for you? Oh, I think you need to unmute yourself.
Thank you very much.
No
I think with
worries.
what's gone on in the last 4 months, there's definitely been a driver to excel this into the virtual world. You can tell by sales of virtual headsets, being sold out across the world. Tons of more people flooded into. I used to go on VR chat, and I would be in there, and there'd be 3 of us in a group. Then it became 20, and then 60, and then all of a sudden you couldn't get in anymore because it was getting too full. So I think the engagement of the masses, they're realizing that virtually is kind of maybe moving forward the way the norm is going to be. Brick and mortar is kind of the way we used to do things, and that excelled very quickly with this. Reaching ourselves on a grand scale, I believe with social, getting the old art scene. If at a gallery of contemporary art you put in one screen that could change every 15 seconds and show digital art, I think no matter what they were used to or what their palette right now kind of has a hunger for, if they were to see this, I think it would drastically change their mind. If anyone goes into, say, Decentraland and walks in the auditorium and sees Josie's artwork around, no one comes out and going, wow, that was disappointing. Everyone's like, oh my good God, I can't believe that exists already. And typically kind of it spreads from there. So I think getting people into the space first, or giving them a very short glimpse of the possibilities and what's being built out right now, and these are very early days still, should open their mind up and at least give them a taste for what's possible moving forward. And digital art is only getting better with the more layers, and things that can be done with it.
Absolutely, yes. I think in the next few years we'll see how actually digital technologies can empower so much within the contemporary art world. And George, since you are connected with so many users all across the globe, how do you think will be best to sort of invite people to be joining those virtual worlds, and how would you best communicate to them?
Well, let me say first that uh, the world is going digital. To give you an example, when we were going back to school, we were having a backpack with books that weighed 10 kilos, right? Today, kids have a tablet. So everything is going digital. And the virtual worlds, if you've seen the Ready Player One movie, which actually immerses into the virtual worlds, it shows us that the future is digital. So especially from the youth generation today, there is a huge interest when it comes to anything digital rather than physical. So the virtual worlds today can provide a nice way to be entertained, which is a very big aspect and the reason to choose to join the virtual world. And on the other hand, all these projects, and like Steve said earlier, we are in the early days. All these projects are evolving, and they are evolving in a way that players and kids today can actually have a job inside the virtual world. Like Neo World, for example, is trying to do, which, if I'm not mistaken, Neo World is the very, very first virtual world on the blockchain. So there is all this momentum right now for the virtual worlds and anything digital, and the new generation embraces that stuff. So it's kind of actually easier today to get them join a virtual world rather than it was a few years ago, like for example Second Life, which was still, it was a virtual world, but it wasn't any of interest for the most of the players. So today, yeah, definitely digital is the new era. It's the new black, like people say. So it's gonna be a very great experience and a long journey, definitely.
Thank you for sharing your vision on this point. I'm curious to hear from Alegria, if we're talking about, moving on from communicating to users and thinking about how we can make our own projects scalable, thinking about scalability on a global level. How would you see that going? What's your vision on how we can make those projects meaningful for communities on a large scale?
It's hard to say about meaningful. I know maybe about making it easier, right? But if one project starts adopting an easier method, I can see them all going, and also the meaningful ones also adopting it, right? So it's also a good thing when anything can uh, onboard a user a little bit easier. I think recently we've seen a lot of easier wallets come in to the space where, like Fortmatic, where it's just an email and a password, kind of what the user is used to already. They have some forms of accepting fiat, or letting you charge your balance up with fiat. Again, things that people might be used to with topping up an account and stuff like that. So once that things like that are standard across the board, and people understand that this token is transferable and it might cost them something to move it or whatnot, it should come with that. Because I started using projects on Wax, and the cloud wallet that they were using was so simple. Like I signed in, maybe not the most secure way. I signed in with like my Discord name, right? You know, I was buying things for like 30 cents, so I wasn't too scared. But that right there is like, oh, I can just use the same name. Like I took my little punk over there, and I got my punk on my wallet now. So it was just super easy. And they took a credit card, so why not purchase this thing? So if you can make that single thought process for a user, once they see this artwork or this game item, the thought is the same. Why not purchase it? Look how easy it was. Boom. And now you have this thing that you own. So it's changing for the better, I think, and very rapidly, which I'm happy about.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and talking about interoperability and the fact that now it became so easy to pay with a card using crypto, for example. I watched a video this morning of a friend of mine who bought a coffee with crypto, and he was so excited because it was the first time that he could actually do that. And I feel, in a way, it is probably a possibility to onboard people by sharing the fact that it can be easy, so that all these sort of gaps in between that stand in between us and the use of technology can actually shrink and make the whole experience more enjoyable in a way. I was curious to hear from Drew as well on how do you see your project scaling?
Yeah, that's a great question. Obviously, the harder part of the scaling question is actually the physical goods production. And I honestly think as this conversation, this opportunity progresses, we're likely to see more interest and possibly even higher valuations around the digital pieces themselves. It's been interesting to see the responses of people, or to actually just watch the both pricing and purchasing dynamics and differences in between somebody considering spending, say, $400 on an actual shirt versus $400 on a wearable. In the latter situation, there seems to be a lot less consideration or thought. In the physical shirt conversation, there seems to be a little bit more like, again, maybe it's the mental model of, I know what I typically pay for a shirt, for a pair of pants, for whatnot. And but yeah, the general like purchasing and spending habits are different. Scalability in general, our project's multifaceted in that we are looking to launch and help kind of curate and cultivate decentralized brands that are in combination with artists and then their communities. And these communities are able to be actually active participants, as I was talking to previously, in helping to create products, helping to market those products, earn from their contributions, et cetera. So we're looking to really rely on the community themselves to kind of lift up, accelerate, and grow each independent brand. And so it's really kind of the activation and the growth is kind of a group effort. It's on everybody, and the incentives are aligned to reward those who contribute and add value, et cetera, et cetera. So We've streamlined a lot of the physical production side of it as well. That's kind of a lot of the lift that we as Metafactory are taking off the artists directly, so they can continue to just focus on their art. They don't need to worry about all the headache of the back office, like fashion and clothes production and fulfillment and all those types of things. Where this kind of goes, and one of the things we've been talking about a lot internally is kind of flipping the model a bit, where we've seen this movement with NFTs, where people are putting more metadata directly on chain, stored on IPFS or Arweave, NFT 42, and some other groups have taken this approach on. I can see this extending, and one of the things we're working on to copyright and IP licensing, personal use and commercial use built directly into the asset itself. So instead of the creator or the artist directly needing to establish a store, maintain it, market these things, activate a community, the individual who just loves a piece of work or art can actually procure that and then decide to print that on a shirt, print that on a backpack, on a lunch pail, or use it in some other ways. That could be for personal use, it could be for commercial. And yeah, there's a lot of legal consideration or questioning in there, but that's also an interesting way in terms of how you actually create scale in the situation and remove kind of the bottlenecks of the current models in interesting ways. But.
Yes, what you just described, it is something that I think has been a burning question for the physical art world for many, many years, IPs, and how do we actually provide a copyright and royalty that it is there in place and we can trust. And that is an ongoing question.
Yeah.
Something I wanted to also touch upon, because the panel is about art, gaming, and collectibles, is the fact, how do we collect? We know, because we're in a digital art fair, that collecting, for example, we've been talking to many artists, it can happen, both by using, for example, a PayPal link where you connect straight away with the artist and purchase right away from them, but also through crypto or through different methods. So I would like to ask Deen and Ghislaine, and then pass it on to Steve, and asking, as we are concluding this panel, how do you feel the experience of collecting art and engaging with art from a physical into a digital environment has changed, across the years? We were used to collect art by visiting a gallery, expressing our interest and collecting those objects. But at the same time, now that the market has become so much more fluid and progressive, we're seeing crypto, for example, ensuring more security, for example, on the royalties and how the artists are getting rewarded once the first day sale, for example, is being made. So I was curious to know, how did you see this experience sort of shifting from a more traditional way into something more experimental? And what's your vision on that? How do you see that going forward in terms of collecting art? Deen?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question. That is not, it's a question that I started working in digital art 10 years ago, and it was already a very, very present question. And I was working along an artist presenting his piece to different manifestation. And it was always, some people would come and ask us, although his piece was physical, but still made from code and digital, but the question, people, we were approached for people to buy it, and actually the problem was also the periodization of the piece and how long it was gonna stay accessible. So there's also this question of kind of keeping the piece up to date and keeping the code, and how do you collect this, so and how do you present it in 20 years or in 30 years? So I think it's still a very, very kind of present question, with which the currency have solved brought some of the answers, but there's still this question of kind of keeping the piece up to date that is still very present.
Mm-hmm. And Ghislaine, since you've been experiencing, gallery environments from the more traditional way, and until entering into the more virtual space, how would you see this going in terms of collecting art? How would you see this experience in collecting for collectors, but also for artists moving forward?
Yes, well, I followed really carefully across many years the growth of this area of virtual and digital art. So, you know, groups like Sedition, very, very early, you know, actually looks a bit old fashioned now, but actually is definitely was one of the first places where you could buy and vault, put in a vault, collectible digital pieces, use them on multiple screens around you. I think one of the key things about collecting, though, is that it's not always about making money. Yeah, of course it is. If you need to sell some or change it, it's actually about creating meaning around yourself and having things around you which make you feel good or make you think in different ways. So, and I think if we look at younger generations and how they collect, going back to an example which I got to know quite well through my sons is Pokemon Go, you know, which actually we probably all think is really basic and absolutely, you know, will be looked back on, though, as a starting point of this kind of collectible scenario where you're using AR in physical space and running around everywhere. Your body's fully involved and actually not perfect, but you're learning too. So it has a meaning, yeah. And then you can go and buy the physical cards, and then you can buy the little figures, and etc. So I think for the future, however, we've got to really look at how we make a much more unique link to the collector. And I think that possibly interactivity in the long run may well, through AI and other means, be linked into biometric interactions. So it might be absolutely unique to that owner. That actually that owner, it would only work for that one person because it's reliant on multi-factored, you know, authentication of biometric features, which are mine. My heartbeat, my iris, my fingertip is going to, you know, create that unique, special, private, possibly experience, which I've bought for me and which I can shift and change within it and make fluid and do interactive things. So I think we need to do some really clever thinking here about how meaning is attached to this collecting scenario more deeply. As I know, you know, very experienced salespeople and collectors in the fine art world know, yeah, and how that actually is. It's not just about money. It's not just about creating loot boxes. It's not just about creating a kind of gambling scenario with our younger generations, but which actually creates a much more sophisticated view of actually what you want to own, what you want to feel precious about, what you possibly want to keep for life. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's an interesting question that we can sort of leave out there for any organization and projects that is currently looking at enhancing that experience, making it even more meaningful for users and for owners. And as we are concluding this panel, I would like for all of you to be thinking, and Steve, also you, what do we think of digital art in terms of a collectible experience? So can digital art really become the new brand? You know, we've been looking at, for example, Andy Warhol creating art that made himself become a brand. So can collecting digital within the crypto environment can become the most wanted thing in the contemporary art world, for example?
And I would say my take on this. So when I got into crypto in say 2013, Bitcoin was pretty much what I owned solely. Found ETH in the ICO. I got involved in that in 2014. And at the time, people were saying, "Are you crazy to spend your Bitcoin on this project that you know nothing about? You know, nothing's going to beat Bitcoin." And if I wouldn't have done that, I wouldn't have got into ETH. And of course, ETH exploded. I see the NFT space and the metaverses and art and whatnot as kind of the second generation of that. So if I don't spend my ETH on this, I'm going to be missing out on the next opportunity. And I don't think, you know, people are getting into crypto now saying, you know, what can I don't know anything about it. They're saying, what can I make the most money on? Which is a strange way to get into it. I understand why they're doing it. That's not why I'm here in any way. But it's not really about that. It's like, if you want to see the booms that happened then, it's going to be in this space, and I'm pretty certain of that. This is where it's at in the second phase. This is where mass adoption is going to happen. If you take Josie, for example, I met Josie Bellini, who's a pretty prominent artist in the digital space, at 2008 Consensus in New York. Bought a whole bunch of her physical pieces. Hadn't even made NFTs yet. She hadn't made any yet. When they did come out, she was like, "Here, you get them free because you bought the artwork." And I was like, "Right on, these are pretty cool." Nowadays, the artwork is selling for $250 a piece, and her NFTs are selling for about $1,200 a piece. So the demand for the NFT way outweighs her physical pieces. There's no shipping involved. You know, you get it immediately. I retweeted something about her. You know, This Is America poster. 70 of us got a special NFT of hers. They're on the second market. They're going for like almost half an ETH now. So it's, I don't know, I think the demand for the NFT outweighs the physical in the community now, if anyone's involved in it. And even seeing my children, if they want a V-Bucks skin or a Fortnite skin or a Fortnite toy, they would never choose the toy. They would 100% choose the skin. So the next generation is already, their mindset is already in the digital world. We are having a hard time letting go of that because that's how we were, you know, raised and what we saw. But the next generation is just like, they have a phone. They don't know a time when there wasn't a phone. They're not going to know a time when they weren't engaged in digital. So it's coming and there's not much we can do about it. And I, for one, want to build something really cool so that they, you know, can utilize when they get there.
Totally, yes. What you described there is a scenario where, you know, we sort of see us phasing out the understanding of the virtual environment where the new generation is coming in and they already have the old knowledge, you know, the old toolbox ready there. And they are already looking at applying solutions that are miles ahead from what we're thinking right now. So I'm super excited to see what the future, you know, is got to show us. As we are concluding this panel, I would like for every one of you to sort of leave us with a comment or a vision on what we think, you know, we've been talking about the challenges, opportunities, but what we really think about the gaming and contemporary art environment going forward, and how would we like to see this going, you know, in terms of what we would love to see in the upcoming years in the collectible experience for users, but also in the more traditional art world within the gamified experience. So I'm just going to pass these on to Drew, and then we can fool around and talk about that. Drew, what's your vision? What would you like to see happening in the future?
Man, full vision would be somewhere along the lines of Snow Crash, realized for those who haven't seen or read that book. Kind of expanding on your previous question as well. What's great about digital art and collecting, it's you'd think that this idea of verifiable ownership or one-of-one creations would attract this kind of like a collector that's, okay, it's mine. Like I'm seeking something that I can claim is just mine. Like, you know, you're claiming ownership over it. But I think what we've seen is actually the opposite. There's a want to share. And I'd say like this desire to actually share one's collection and with everyone else is one of the things that's led to the growth of and created like the recent land sales hot market around crypto voxels, and now starting to propel Decentraland forward as well. You know, it's a very social experience, and I think that's what's one of the things that's fueling and will continue to kind of fuel the NFT growth, and that's art. And I see wearables as just a form of that art and that expression in a different sense. You know, the future is hard to predict, but I would say it's still very early times. You know, the NFT crypto art space is very niche. The idea of verifiable digital ownership is very niche. I mean, the virtual world blockchain piece is a very, very small subset of the greater virtual space and what's happening in these other worlds, VR chat, for instance. And a lot of them aren't even aware of what we're doing with NFTs and whatnot. So the room for growth and the potential for this to expand in a massive way and open up a market is definitely there. And I think it's an inevitability. And I think driving that will be the want to share, the want to express, and to show off the same way that we do in the physical world. But in a digital one, it's a lot easier to be seen by many more people. And so like versus the number of people you might interact with in a physical space on a daily basis versus a digital one. So you're kind of compounding that expression, if you will. Mm-hmm. But yeah, excited for these possibilities to be realized.
Yeah, I love your vision by saying that people now are very much more keen in sharing rather than retaining for themselves. So totally with you on that
Yeah,
one.
for sure.
Alegria, what's your vision on the future? What would you like to see in the upcoming years?
I really love the feeling that people get by owning these NFTs. It's very personal. It's very you can link it to events or link it to certain people since the community is so small. You know, I might buy something because I know this person and I'll never sell it just because that, or people gift you things. So I want to see that keep growing. And you mentioned if the digital collectibles could be the most wanted assets, and like here I am like, oh, you guys have your cam on, I'm sorry I couldn't have my cam on, but a perfect example is I own this representation of myself, and this is who I am across the whole metaverse. You see me anywhere, this is who I am. So at the same time of me owning this, I'm, you know, now he's worth a lot more. He got to speak to all of you guys here, so you made him more valuable just by being around. And of course, that I would think that something like that can only appreciate a value or be more desirable, especially with a punk where it's so limited in quantity. And to touch on something that Steve said about you know, the kids wanting, instead of something a physical toy, they would want the digital, because maybe to some of us here, somebody, or to some people, when you give them a digital painting, they're like, oh, what can I do with this? Well, you give a toy to a kid now and he's like, well, what can I do with this? It doesn't do anything, look at it, it's just there. You know, I can't play with it, I can't do this. So it's kind of like an inverse role of, you know, what is usability now, like, oh crap. So I can't wait for that kind of idea to be pushed out there as well. So like to sum it up, you know, what is usability, and what feelings do we put behind the things that we own? Yeah.
Totally. Yes. And George, what do you think on that? Do you think that digital asset will become the future?
Yes, definitely. Digital assets is the future, especially if you keep in mind that we are having a big number of growing multiverses. The multiverse is the concept where you take an in-game item. It doesn't have to be an in-game item, any non-fungible token, whether it's a gun or a skin, and the developers can integrate it across multiple games. So imagine having a skin in, let's say, Fortnite or League of Legends, and being able to not only own that item but play another 50 games with the same item. So definitely, digital assets, it's the future, and it is the next booming market for sure.
Absolutely. And I'll be very eager to see where the whole industry will be taking the next steps in. And very few words, Steve, Ghislaine, and Deen, what would you see coming in the next few months and years? And are NFTs the most wanted collectibles?
Just well, my hope in the future is definitely to see more diversity in terms of representation in the gaming industry and in the characters, but also in the making of those games, and in the long term also in the art collector profile. And I think going digital is very much a big hope in that, where there's more possibility for people to be themselves and get involved, even though they can't be physically here. And I think that's definitely something that we can all hope for.
Thank you for sharing your vision, Dean. And Ghislaine, a few words. What would you see coming in the future?
I think we need to all look quite far ahead and work backwards. But I think I back up Deen. We need to design for inclusivity, and we need to design for collaboration, as has been said. We need to design for liveness too, and we need to keep the body at the center of this, because if we continue to disembody the live body, then things will not be taken up. And I even have a problem with VR headsets in this way. I'm looking to a future where we don't have to disembody ourselves. By putting a big box on our heads, we actually can work into immersive data. I do a lot of work in domes and in full immersion and collective immersion. So I'd like to see a lot more liveness linked into the real-time digital and the flow between those happening together, where we can be both virtual and physical at the same time.
Totally, yes. And Steve, are digital assets going to become the most wanted asset?
I would say from a collector's point of view, that will be the case. If you think of, say, Christie's and Sotheby's, if you bought a piece of art now and your digital ownership was a one-of-one NFT, that would just be the standard. It would be expected after some point in time that if I'm buying a piece of value, that I'm getting this NFT that proves governance, online, that this is mine, it's one of one. As far as Digitible won one of the DCL licenses, so we're one of 5 companies that gets to produce them. So if we have on every tag in the actual store in Denver that we're selling the real goods at, if we've got, scan this and enter your ETH address, you automatically get an NFT. If that becomes a norm across, say, Nike, Adidas, and all these other brands, if when you get home, you scan this and an NFT copy is produced in your wallet, it will be expected. And I would think that, if brands aren't offering that, they're handicapping themselves by not, moving forward in the digital era.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today and sharing your visions and thoughts about art, gaming, and collectibles. I very much enjoyed learning from your projects and your visions. Once again, from CADAF, thank you for hosting this panel. And I would invite you all to listen to panel 1 as it was sort of entering into this conversation as we are closing it now. Very much to still discover so many good quotes and food for thought in this conversation. Once again, thank you all. I hope to see you all very soon in real life to carry on
Yes.
this conversation.
Yeah.
Thank you
Bye-bye.
very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks very much.
Thanks.